Art is said to be the beauty of life, filled with lots of creativity and a broad scope that allows everyone to have a feel and expression, showcasing their works. Art as a whole term has different branches, ranging from music to dance to graphics and designs to fashion to poetry and lots more. Our main focus will be on poetry. Poetry as an art form predates written text. The earliest poetry is believed to have been recited or sung, employed as a way of remembering oral history, genealogy, and law. Poetry is often closely related to musical traditions as the earliest poetry exists in the form of hymns, such as the works of Sumerian priestess in Hindwana, and other types of songs such as chants. As such, poetry is a verbal art. Many of the poems surviving from the ancient world are recorded prayers or stories about religious subject matter, but they also include historical accounts, instructions for everyday activities, love songs, and fiction. Many scholars, particularly those researching the Homeric tradition and the oral epics of the Balkans, suggest that early writing shows clear traces of older oral traditions, including the use of repeated phrases as building blocks in larger poetic units. A rhythmic and repetitious form would make a long story easier to remember and retell before writing was available as a reminder. Thus, many ancient works from Vedas 1500 to 1000 BC to the Odyssey 800 to 675 BC appear to have been composed in poetic form to aid memorization and oral transmission. In prehistoric and ancient societies, poetry appears among the earliest records of most literate cultures, with poetic fragments found on early monoliths, runestone, and stele.
Ancient poetry, just as you have said, existed in form of songs, and particularly that in the early periods there were no printing technologies, so that the question of availability of books may not be the parameter for poetry. But taking it to the traditional background, naturally, poetry is meant to be sung, and it is sung in reality.
O Queen of the seven gods, O radiant splendor of light, fountain of life, darling of heaven and earth, priest, daughter and servant of heaven, jeweled and crowned with life, born to be Lord. In your hand are the guardian spirits of the seven gods, and you yourself guard and protect the guardian spirits. You have taken them up and tied them to your hands, have gathered them in and pressed them to your breast. You can fill the land with poison like a snake. Plants vanish from the earth when you thunder like a noon. At your command, the floods come down from the mountain. Supreme in power, Inanna of heaven and earth, whose mouth rains sparkles of lightning over the land, mistress of beasts, given the gods' life spirits by An given the unfailing word to speak at his fateful command. Who can fathom your glory? O wild and rampant eldest daughter of the moon, queen greater than An, who can pay you sufficient homage? Queen of queens, who in accordance with the spirits were greater than your mother the moment you were born, wise and knowing queen of all the lands, mother of men and animals, I sing your praise. I have entered before you in my holy garments, I, the Princess Imperial Enheduanna, singing as I carried your ritual baskets. High Priestess of the Moon, but now no longer can I serve the goodly temple that I established, for the day that dawns in awe scorches my skin, and the sand of the south wind overwhelms me at nightfall. My honey-sweet voice is hoarse and strident. and all that gave me pleasure has fallen to dust. I, who am I among living creatures? Anne, give to punishment the rebels that hate Inanna and split their city walls. Enlil, curse them and let their children perish with no mother there to soothe them. The Queen of Queens, the prop of all the nations, accepted Enheduanna's prayers. Her heart was again as of old. The day became propitious. Inanna showered her beauty and allure and joy like silver moonlight over the land. Ancient Nanu in wonder and awe, and Ningal her mother worshipped her at the temple doorstep. Priestess, queen, noble commander of the gods, destroyer of barbarians, whom Anne made protector of spirits, queen, clothed in allure and attraction, Inanna, praise!
In Africa, poetry has a history dating back to prehistorical times when the creation of hunting poetry and panegyric and elegiac court poetry were developed extensively throughout the history of the empires of the Nile, Niger, and Volta River valleys. Some of the earliest written poetry in Africa can be found among the pyramid texts written during the 25th century BC, while the Epic of Sundiata is one of the most well-known examples of griot court poetry.
Sundiata epic of the old Mali Empire. It is quite traditional, and you see the way the actions go, highly narrative. You see the genealogy. You make up for all other renditions as to the rhythmic movement in terms of delivery. They are highly epical and classical.
In African cultures, performance poetry is traditionally a part of theatrics, which was present in all aspects of pre-colonial African life and whose theatrical ceremonies had many different functions, including political, educative, spiritual, and entertainment.
If we are looking at the epic poetry, it has to do with the heroic deeds of a particular nation by a particular person. When you are looking at the heroic deeds of a people, somebody definitely must have been the head.
Poetics were an element of theatric performance of local oral artists, linguists, and historians, accompanied by local instruments of the people such as kora, the zalem, the mbira, and the djembe drum. Drumming for accompaniment is not to be confused with performance of the talking drum, which is a literature of its own, since it is a distinct method of communication that depends on conveying meaning through non-musical grammatical, tonal and rhythmic rules, imitating speech. Although this performance could be included in this grade, the oldest surviving speculative fiction poem is The Tale of Shipwrecked Sailor, written in Heretic and ascribed a date around 2500 BC. Other sources ascribe the earliest written poetry to the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in cuneiform. However, it is most likely that the tale of the shipwrecked sailor predates Gilgamesh by half a millennium. The oldest epic poetry besides the Epic of Gilgamesh are the Greek epics Iliad and Odyssey, and the Indian Sanskrit epics Ramayana and Mahabharata. Some scholars believe that either the Mahabharata or the Tibetan epic of King Gesa is the longest example of epic poetry in history. Ancient thinkers sought to determine what makes poetry distinctive as a form and what distinguishes good poetry from bad, resulting in the development of poetics or the study of aesthetics of poetry. Some ancient societies, such as the Chinese through the classical history of one of the 5 classics, developed canons of poetic works that had ritual as well as aesthetic importance. Context can be critical to poetics and to the development of poetic genres and form. For example, Poetry employed to record historical events in epics, such as Gilgamesh or Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, will necessarily be lengthy and narrative, while poetry used for liturgical purposes in hymns, psalms, surahs, and hadiths is likely to have an inspirational tone, whereas elegies and tragedy are intended to evoke deep internal emotional responses.
When you bring it to the African environment, you discover clearly how African oral literature, particularly poetry, came into existence. It's been the rock songs, riddles, myths making, epic and other forms of narratives that are traditional in form. And I think that basically is what gave an age to African literature.
The Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor. May your heart prosper, my master. Behold, we have reached home. The mallet having been taken, the mooring post is driven in. The bow rope having been placed on land, thanksgiving and praise to God are given. Everyone is embracing his companions. Our crew returned safely, and there was no loss to our army. Listen to me, O master, and wash yourself. Give water to your hands, so that you may answer the king when you are addressed, and may speak to him sensibly, and answer without stammering in telling this tale. A man's mouth rescues him. He speaks and causes one to show indulgence. I was going to the mine of the king. I went down to the sea in a ship 120 cubits in length and 40 cubits in width. 120 of the choicest sailors of Egypt were in it. Whether they looked at the sky or the land, their hearts were braver than lions. They could foretell a storm before it came, foul weather before it occurred. The storm came while we were on the sea, before we approached the land. While we were sailing, it made a continuous howling, raising a wind. Waves were in it of 8 cubits. Then I was cast upon an island by a wave of the sea. I spent 3 days alone, my heart as my only companion. Resting in the shelter of a tree, I embraced the shade. I found figs and grapes there. Leeks and cucumbers were there, as though cultivated. Fish were there, together with birds. There was nothing that was not within it. Then I satisfied myself and placed some of it on the ground. I made fire, and there made a sacrifice. And then I heard the hungry voice of the raging storm strike. What was it moving quickly, fast approaching, landing right before me? I thought it was a wave of the sea, or people taking refuge from the waves in the mouth of the channel. Trees broke, and the earth shook. What is this in the water? Facing it, I crouched, as it was approaching quickly. I covered my face, but when I uncovered it, I found that it was a snake that was coming. It was 30 cubits long, his beard greater than 2 cubits. His body was overlaid with gold, and his eyebrows were of lapis lazuli. He was bent up in front. He opened his mouth to me and said, "Who was it who brought you here, commoner? If you fail to tell me who brought you to this island, I will cause you to know yourself, you being as ashes, having become as one who is not seen." He was speaking to me, but I did not hear it. I was in his presence, but I was ignorant of myself. Then he placed me in his mouth and took me to his dwelling, his place of happiness, and set me down untouched, I being uninjured, nothing being taken from me. He opened his mouth to me while I was on my belly in his presence. Then he asked me, "Who has brought you, commoner? Who has brought you to this island in the sea?" Then I answered him this, my arms being bent in respect in his presence. I said to him, "I was going to the mine of the king in a ship 120 cubits in length and 40 cubits in width. 120 sailors were in it of the choicest of Egypt. Whether they looked at the sky or at the land, their hearts were braver than lions. They could foretell a storm before it came, foul weather before it occurred. Every one of them, his heart was brave, his arm strong. There was none ignorant in their midst. The storm came while we were on the sea, before we approached the land. While we were sailing, it made a continuous howling. Waves were in it of 8 cubits. Then the boat died, and of all those that were in it not one remained, except me. Behold, I am at your side. Then I was cast upon this island by a wave of the sea. Then he said to me, Do not fear, commoner, for it is God who caused you to live. He brought you to this island of Ka. There is nothing that is not within it. It is filled with all good things. Behold, you shall complete month upon month until you complete 4 months from home on this island. A ship will come from home with sailors in it whom you know. You will go home with them, and you will die in your city. Happy is he who tells what he has tasted, a painful thing having passed by. Let me tell you what occurred on this island when I was on it with my brothers and children. We totaled 75 snakes, my children together with my brothers. I will not mention to you a little daughter, whom I had obtained by prayer. Then a star fell, and these went up in flame because of it. It happened that I was not with them when they burned. I was dead to them, and would have died for them when I found them in a heap of corpses altogether. If you are strong, subduing your heart, you will fill your embraces with your children. You will kiss your wife. You will see your house, for it is more beautiful than anything. You will reach the residence of your homeland in which you were in it together with your companions. Having stretched out on my belly, I touched the ground in his presence. I said to him, I will speak of you, and relate all that has happened to me. One will praise God for you in the city, before the magistrates of the entire land. I will offer sacrifices of incense and myrrh. I will cause to be sent to you ships loaded with provisions of every town in Egypt, as is done for a God who loves a people in a distant land. Then he laughed at me, for what I said was foolishness to him. He said to me, You are not rich in myrrh, being an owner of incense. It is I who am the Lord of Punt, and the myrrh. It belongs to me. And the incense that you spoke of bringing, it is abundant on this island. When it happens that you leave this place, it will not occur that you will see this island again, for it will have become water. Then in time, the boat came like what he had predicted beforehand. I went and placed myself in a high tree and recognized those in it. Having gone to report it, I found that he knew it, and he said to me, Health, commoner, to your house so that you may see your children. Make my name good in your town, that is my due from you. Then I placed myself upon my belly, my arms bent in respect before him. And he gave to me a great quantity of myrrh, oils, spices, perfume, eye paint, giraffes' tails, great lumps of incense, elephants' tusks, greyhounds, monkeys, baboons, and all kinds of precious things. Then I loaded them upon this boat, and it happened as I placed myself on my belly to give thanks to him, that he said to me, Behold, you will approach home in 2 months. You will be full, you will embrace your children, you will be young in the home where you will be buried. Then I went down to the river bank, and called to the sailors who were in this boat. I gave praise upon the bank to the Lord of this land, and those in it did likewise. It was a sailing which we did downstream to the palace of the king. We approached the residence after 2 months, which he had said. Then I entered it before the sovereign, and I brought to him the gifts which I had brought out of this island. Then he gave praise to me before the magistrates of the land to its ends. I was made a follower, and I was endowed with 200 servants. See me after I returned to the land of Egypt, after what I saw and tasted. Listen to my mouth, for it is good for people to listen. Then my master said to me, Do not continue, my arrogant friend. One does not give water to a bird at dawn that will be slaughtered in the morning. And so it is done, from its beginning to its end, as it was found in writing, a scribe cunning of fingers, Ameni, son of Ameni.
Civilization started in Egypt. All these formations at the level of literary tradition, particularly in the oral form, have enough background from Egypt. And so the modern technologies that have given age to Western literature is just the sort of borrowing from the oral tradition into the modern era.
Classical thinkers employed classification as a way to define and assess the quality of poetry. Notably, Aristotle's Poetics describes the three genres of poetry, the epic, comic, and tragic, and develops rules to distinguish the highest quality poetry of each genre based on the underlying purpose of the genre.
The classification that is based on Aristotle's belief. Of course, the classical thinkers like Aristotle and others had some kind of foundations in trying to bring up what makes up for modern poetry at this time. But the reality is that, of course, those classifications still hold.
Later, aestheticians identified three major genres: epic poetry, lyric poetry, and dramatic poetry, treating comedy and tragedy as subgenres of dramatic poetry. Aristotle's work was influential throughout the Middle East during the Islamic Golden Age, as well as in Europe during Renaissance. Later, poets and aestheticians often distinguish poetry from and define it in opposition to prose, which is generally understood as writing a proclivity to logical explication and global trade. In addition to a boom in translation, during the Romantic period, numerous ancient works were rediscovered. The development of modern poetry is generally seen as having started at the beginning of the 20th century and extend into the 21st century. Among its major practitioners are Robert Frost, William Stevens, and Anne Carson. The use of verse to transmit cultural information continues today. Many Americans know that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. An alphabet song teaches the name and order of the letters of the alphabet. Another jingle states the length and names of the months in the Gregorian calendar. Some writers believe poetry has its origins in song. Most of the characteristics that distinguish it from other forms of utterance, rhythm, rhyme, compression, intensity of feeling, the use of refrains, appear to have come about from efforts to fit words to musical forms. In the European tradition, the earlier surviving poems, the Homeric and Hesiodic epics, identify themselves as poems to be recited or chanted to musical accompaniments rather than as pure songs. Another interpretation is that rhythm, refrains, and canons are essentially paraphrastic devices that enable the reciter to reconstruct the poem from memory. In pre-literate societies, these forms of poetry are composed for and sometimes during performance.
As it is today, like Nigerian poetry or Nigerian literature generally, it is highly traditionally oriented, so that when you look at the background of any writings, you discover that they come from the people's background.
There was a certain degree of fluidity to the exact wording of poems. The introduction of writing fixed the context of a poem to the version that happened to be written down and survive. Written composition meant poets began to compose for an absent reader. The invention of printing accelerated these trends. Poets are now writing more for the eye than for the ear.
The print is to give it a more readable aspect, and then the centralization. Because even in Nigeria, when you begin to look at Nigerian literature from the oral perspective, of course, some of these works have been traditional in form and then in delivery, yet they are printed forms, and the tradition has not been removed from them.
The development of literacy gave rise to more personal, short poems intended to be sung. These are called lyrics, which derives from the Greek lyra and lyre, the instrument that was used to accompany the performance of Greek lyrics from about the 7th century BC onward. The Greeks' practice of singing hymns in large choruses gave rise in the 6th century BC to dramatic verses, and to the practice of writing poetic plays for performance in theatres led to a resurgence of performance poetry in lyric genre.